A little bit more about Reed's career as we go through the presentation as well. And then I am also a venture capitalist. So I run a firm called Blitzscaling Ventures based on the ideas of the book, where we invest in startups. And especially these days, our biggest focus is our AI fund, because guess what? Everyone in the VC world is focused on AI, and therefore we are as well. And in addition to all that, writing books and investing in companies, one of the things I do in my capacity as an author is to speak. And that can include going in person to places. Like most recently, I was in Indianapolis, and before that, Singapore. I'll be going to Riyadh, Dallas, and Singapore during the rest of the month, as well as New York, although I don't know if I'm presenting there. I'm just participating in a program. So, and then of course, I'm doing virtual events like this one. So that's kind of the way my life goes. And I am based out of Silicon Valley, Palo Alto to be precise, just a mile or two down the road from Stanford University, which is my alma mater.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing that, Chris. And I'll kind of have a couple questions that we have saved throughout the presentation that some people that couldn't join wanted to share. But I'll kind of ask you this, and then we can transition into the presentation. But what was really the ethos, or why Blitzscaling, right? What was the kind of concept behind that, or why you would wanted to write it, and what led us here today?
Absolutely. So back in 2015, we had finished and released our previous book, The Alliance, gotten off to a very successful launch, done a lot of cool things done a lot of cool things for the book and got a lot of attention for it. So that was great. But then we're like, okay, what's the next book we want to write? And Reed said, I've actually got an idea. I was over in London and I was on a panel, and the question came up, what is the secret of Silicon Valley? And I didn't like any answers that I got. I didn't like it when people said, oh, it's because we have these great research universities like Stanford and Berkeley. True, they're some of the greatest universities in the world. There's a lot of places in the world with great universities as well. The second thing was, oh, well, there's all these brilliant venture capitalists. I'm like, yeah, Silicon Valley has the greatest concentration of venture capital. There's no question. But for an individual startup, what matters is getting a yes. And you can get a yes almost anywhere in the world. And in fact, much of the money that's invested in Silicon Valley comes from other places. And the final thing that people often would say is, oh, there's this culture that's accepting of failure. And there's no question that could be an issue. There's certain countries where failure is not an option, or at least not an option that people want to embrace. But at the same time, startup knowledge has been disseminated pretty broadly. It's all available on the internet, and people have really started to turn entrepreneurship into a thing that's much more respected than it once was. So it didn't feel like any of those answers were really satisfactory. So we said, okay, well, if those answers aren't satisfactory, let's figure out what we do think is the actual answer. And the quest to find that answer led us to blitzscaling, both the class we taught and at Stanford and the book that resulted from it.
Phenomenal. Thanks for sharing the journey. So, yeah, that being said, I mean, feel free to tell us how you best want to run this, whether you want to
Yeah,
have
well,
conversations throughout or
I will do a quick presentation. I'll go through it relatively fast because I'm sure this is a very advanced audience, so that will be easy. And then from there, we'll be able to open up the Q&A. And if there are burning questions, then feel free to interrupt me and we can go through those questions as well.
amazing. All right, we're excited. Let's kick it off. And do you want, and I guess as people have questions, if you have questions throughout, drop them in the chat, right? You can either raise your hand. We can also, as we have dedicated time at the end, certainly cover it then. But yeah, if you have questions and don't want to forget it, feel free to drop it in the chat and we can always make sure that we get it addressed. So
Perfect.
amazing. And Chris, you have the floor.
You got it. And hopefully you guys are now seeing my slides.
Yep, looks great.
Awesome. So let's talk about blitzscaling. So the idea behind blitzscaling, as I mentioned, came from this class that we taught at Stanford, and it's really based on Reed's career. So most people know Reed as the founder of LinkedIn, but what they don't know is that's actually one of the smaller successes that he's been involved with. He was a founding board member and executive of PayPal. He was the first investor in Facebook. He and Peter Thiel bought 10% of Facebook for $500,000. Worked out pretty well for them. He founded LinkedIn. He was the Series A lead investor in Airbnb. And he was the first commercial investor in OpenAI's for-profit entity. So, and he was also a founding board member and donor to OpenAI when it was still just a nonprofit organization. So over and over again, he's been involved in creating some of the most valuable companies in the world. And we said, okay, there's got to be a common thread. There's got to be something that connects all these things together. And we came up with blitzscaling. So we define blitzscaling as the pursuit of rapid growth by prioritizing speed over efficiency in the face of uncertainty. Rapid growth, that's pretty straightforward. Everyone who's an entrepreneur wants rapid growth. But prioritizing speed in the face of uncertainty is the tough part because, when things are uncertain, like if you're trying to wander around in the dark in an open field, your instinct is not to speed up, it's to slow down. And that's because it's safer to go slower. So the question is, why would you take on the risk of going faster? And the reason is there are some
Yeah.
times where the greatest risk is not taking on enough risk. So for those people who are familiar with the movie Talladega Nights starring Will Ferrell, he is a race car driver named Ricky Bobby. Not the smartest guy in the world, but he does know this key truth. If you ain't first, you're last. Now, that's not something that applies to every market, but it does apply to some markets. And in those markets, those winner take most markets, the most important thing is to win the market. Because if you lose the market, whatever else you did, doesn't matter. The vast majority of the returns go to the winner. And so when you are blitzscaling, what you've done is you've identified a Ricky Bobby market and you've set out to win it. So what is involved in identifying such a market? Well, the first thing is you need to see that winner take most market dynamic. Most of the time, that's because of network effects. If you think about the most valuable companies in the world, so many of them rode a network effect to the top. Facebook, that's pretty obvious thanks to the social network. Microsoft, classic platform network effect with Windows. Apple Classic again with the iPhone and so on and so forth. And the way a network effect works is as the number of nodes in the network grows, the value of the network to each individual node grows, which means you can multiply a rising number of users by rising value per user and get insanely high value growth, which you can then later translate into revenues and market cap. So that's great. But that just tells you what the market dynamic is. It doesn't tell you that you're going to be the winner. It says that somebody's going to win and somebody's going to make a lot of money, but it doesn't necessarily have to be you. That's where the second thing comes in. You need to have that superior distribution, a go-to-market strategy that will allow you to be the one that wins the market. And in many cases, this is not just a matter of spending more money than other people. That's a misconception of blitzscaling. It's being smarter about it, having virality, for example, or being able to tap into specific distribution channels that maybe other people have overlooked. Now, the other thing about blitzscaling is you can't blitzscale a bad business and expect to make money. If you take a bad business and you make it much, much bigger and less efficient, you just made it a terrible business. And that's what the folks at WeWork discovered. And so you still need all the things that make a business a good business. You need product market fit so it's sustainable, and so your customers stick with you. You need a big market with high gross margins because the purpose of business is to make money, and you need the ability to scale up the operations and organization. But those things are secondary. The first thing is, am I in a Ricky Bobby market? Can I win that market? If so, I can scale up a good business. The other thing about blitzscaling is it's an iterative process. So as your company grows, it doesn't stay the same. In fact, as it increases in size in terms of number of employees, the dynamics change with every order of magnitude. And so one of the things entrepreneurs need to keep in mind is as they grow, the things that work for them won't keep working. Or as Marshall Goldsmith put it, what got you here won't get you there. And so what worked when you were 5 people in a garage doesn't work when you're 50 people in an office. What works when you're 50 people in an office doesn't work when you're 500 people across multiple campuses, and so on and so forth. And so as an entrepreneur, what you should be doing is keeping an eye on these stages and understanding that you're going to have to reinvent your company at each stage. Reinvent the way that you run the company, reinvent the way that you manage other people, and so on and so forth. And the good news is we've identified key transitions that are going to happen at all those different stages. So these are the general transitions that every company has to go through as it grows. And we believe that if you know about these in advance, then you're better suited to actually putting them into work. So one of the things I often do is I like to be at least a little interactive. So what I want is for us to pick one of these for me to explain. All of them are available in the book. All of the stuff in the book is probably available via ChatGPT or any other AI firm that has sucked down the content illegally. So you don't need to have me go over all of them at once, but I will go over one of them for you right now. Catherine was the first. Oh my God. Wait a minute. Catherine, are you my classmate as well? I got to ask because I have a classmate named Catherine Morris. Oh, don't worry. I still like you. The fact that you're not my classmate is okay. It's a very common name. Very true. Let's see. So the specific thing that Catherine asked, and let me pull it up again, is single focus to multi. This is really funny. This is the 4th time I've been giving this talk in the past 2 days. And this is the 4th time that somebody has picked single focus to multi-threading. I don't know what it is. There's something in the air. So very quickly, The thing that makes a startup special is focus. Startup doesn't have more people, doesn't have more resources, doesn't have a better brand than a big company, but it has the ability to focus. And the analogy I use is a startup is like a magnifying glass. If a big company is like a skylight letting in all this light, startup is like a magnifying glass. It's tiny in comparison, but it focuses every single photon onto a single point, which allows you, if you're a bored kid like me, to light old leaves on fire. But if you're a startup, it allows you to build a real business. And that is one of the things that will help you as you're a startup. Like, we are going to be single mindedly focused on this one thing, but that's not the stage you stay at. As your startup grows, as your business grows, eventually, in order to actually take advantage of all the opportunities in front of you, you start having to be able to do more than one thing at once. You got to talk and chew gum, walk and chew gum at the same time. And so this is where multi-threading comes in, right? You need multiple threads that can run processes in parallel. And the example I use for this is the sort of first iconic company of Silicon Valley, Hewlett Packard, 20th century company that for most of the 20th century was probably one of the world's most well-known technology companies. Dave Packard and Bill Hewlett actually created much of what we think of as the startup world. So stock options and broad sharing in company prosperity, that was Hewlett Packard. Informality, not wearing suits all the time, that was Hewlett Packard. Management by walking around, where the founders and executives don't just sit in an ivory tower, but actually go and talk to individual people, that was also Hewlett Packard. And so they pioneered this as well. They didn't think of it as a big fancy thing. They just did it. What happened was they let their people pursue interesting ideas. And as those interesting ideas got traction, as they got customers and things like that, those ideas would naturally begin to accrete more people around them. And once one of those projects got to around 100 people, they said, we're making this formally a division of Hewlett Packard. So that strategy allowed them to set up these multiple threads, each of which is essentially a mini company, so that in a single larger company, you can continue to have that magnifying glass like focus for some of the individual units. There are also these counterintuitive rules of blitzscaling, because I went to Harvard Business School, and I can tell you, I did not have a class where they said, here's how you could be more inefficient. That's not typically what business focuses on. And so to successfully blitzscale requires you to sometimes go against conventional business wisdom. And these are some examples of that. So again, with our chat, who wants to pick one of these for me to go over? See who's got the fastest typing fingers. Brittany. Nice work, Brittany. Let fires burn. So all of you, many of you, I suspect, are entrepreneurs. And so when you go to sleep tonight at 10 p.m., nice and early, so you can get a full 8 hours plus of sleep, I'm sure as you lay your head down on the pillow, you think to yourself, there's nothing else I could do today. There's nothing unresolved. There's nothing hanging over me. No, actually, that's not how any of it works at all. In fact, there's always stuff going on, and that's where the principle of letting fires burn comes in. I compare being a founder of a company to being like the captain of one of those old sailing vessels in the era of wooden boats with sails and cannons. And here's what I want you to picture. Maybe you've seen Master and Commander, maybe you've seen the Pirates of the Caribbean, whatever. Picture one of those wooden ships. Now, the thing about wood is there are two key elements of wood. First, wood floats, and second, wood burns. So wood floats means it's actually hard to sink a wooden ship. And so usually the ships were not sunk when you hit the cannonballs into them. The cannonballs might, destroy the cannon, might harm the crew, but it usually wouldn't sink the ship. But wood also burns. And that was the most terrifying thing for any sailor if your ship catches fire. Well, guess what? When you're running a startup, it's like you're commanding a ship and there's fires everywhere. There's fires as far as the eye can see. And you do not have enough time, you do not have enough water to put out all of them. And what you have to do is become ruthless at triaging and deciding which things are going to kill you right away versus which things are going to kill you later. Because you can deal with the kill you later things when it comes like you go into the emergency room, like, we saw something funny on your latest x-ray. Like, yeah, what about the knife sticking out of my chest? Can we take care of that first? So letting fires burn is the process of deliberately letting the lower priority fires burn, even though you know that they're bad, even though you know that they're going to get worse. Because in order to be able to actually have that focus that we talked about earlier, you need to pick and choose the battles you fight, and you have to fight fewer battles. You'll get around to putting out those fires later on, but not today. Now, on to AI, because I promised Blitzscaling the AI revolution. So obviously, you guys are here. You're not skeptics. AI is huge. This is the industrial revolution. This is the impact of a technology revolution. Throughout human history, basically, we are static. Right? The global per capita GDP per person doesn't move around much. Every once in a while, there's a Black Death and it goes down. Every once in a while, there's a Roman Empire and it goes up. But it's basically the same. And that's because everything is done by hand, right? Before the Industrial Revolution, everything had to be done with our muscles or with animal muscles. Occasionally, you get like a windmill or a paddle wheel in a water in a river or something like that. But for the most part, we do everything by hand. And so there's only so much that we can do. The Industrial Revolution unlocked that. All of a sudden, we're using mechanical power, we're using steam and then electricity to make stuff happen faster. By the way, this is reliant on energy. So there's a key analogy to the AI revolution today as well. The Industrial Revolution dramatically increased productivity. You saw what it did to the GDP, but here's an example. The British textile industry saw labor factor productivity increase by a factor of 40. Now, 40%, 40 times. Each individual worker could do 40 times as much. That has huge impacts. On the AI side, we're seeing the same thing, except for the first time, we're amplifying brain power with computing power. We could always do it with mathematics, with first an abacus, then a calculator, then a spreadsheet, even a relational database. But what AI does is it allows us to deal with the messy stuff in real life that historically only human beings could do. And so things like reviewing an NDA. There's AI software out there that can help lawyers review NDAs and be 300 times as productive. Think about that, being able to pay your lawyer for 6 minutes of work instead of multiple hours of work. That'd be definitely a revolution. And AI ties in with blitzscaling because it's creating these winner take most opportunities. OpenAI just officially sold stock at $500 billion of valuation. It's the winner that's taking most. Now, there's other people who are in this. Obviously, Google's still in this, Anthropic's still in this, but being the market leader is just definitely valuable. That market is done. We're not going to, nobody on this call is going to go out and outcompete Microsoft, Google, OpenAI at this point. But there are plenty of other product categories within AI where there's going to be these kinds of winners as well. And again, it's not just going to be OpenAI that takes everything. It's like saying in the old days, oh, you know what? AOL is going to dominate because it's the way people get on board. Or Cisco is always going to be the world's most valuable company because they make the plumbing. Now, the thing about creating value with your startups is it's very tempting just to say, okay, here's how I take an existing product and make it faster, cheaper, and better. And that's pretty exciting because usually we can't make things faster, cheaper, and better. Usually we have to pick. But with AI, we're allowed to do this, which is pretty amazing. It's still not the way that the greatest value gets created. An example I use is the iPhone. I'm sure most of you have an iPhone in your pocket right now. Let me ask you a question about the iPhone. Is it faster at making phone calls than the old phones? Is it better at call quality than those old phones? And is it cheaper than those old phones, which they used to give you for free? No, the iPhone is not faster, better, or cheaper at being a phone. What it is it's something else that happens to have phone functionality in it. And we value that something else so much more than just making phone calls that we're willing to tolerate the crappy phone call function of our iPhones as a result. So when you are thinking about how you're going to use AI and apply it, it's not just about faster, cheaper, and better. It's about figuring out what is it that wasn't possible before that can be this new category, this new product, this new thing that, as Steve Jobs would put it, changes the world. Now, as you're trying to figure this out, you're probably trying to figure out which industry to do this in. And I can tell you right now, some industries are going to be decimated by AI. Other industries are going to be dramatically accelerated and enhanced. And to figure it out, you have to ask these two questions. The first is, how much can AI amplify or replace human brain power? The more AI can actually amplify or replace the brain power, the larger the magnitude of the effect. However, that doesn't tell us the polarity of the effect. Is it positive or negative? That's what the second question is for. How elastic is the demand curve? So if you remember your economics, you have a supply curve and a demand curve, and where they meet, that's the quantity of product that's sold, and that's the price. What AI does is it tends to lower the price of production. And so the supply curve is going to drop. And what happens, therefore, depends on the shape of the demand curve. If the demand curve is inelastic, that is to say, the price doesn't have much impact on how much people buy, that industry is going to shrink. Because as AI takes out 90% of the cost, 95% of the cost, 99% of the cost, there will inevitably be price competition. and a race to the bottom. And again, I apologize in advance. For those of you who might be working in the legal profession, that's precisely what's going to happen to that profession. Because AI can already do so much of it, because it's going to be inevitable that lawyers are going to adopt AI, become more productive. And even if they keep charging the same amount of money per hour, each individual lawyer will be serving so many more clients and covering so much more of the law, the number of attorneys will shrink. In contrast, if the demand curve is elastic, it will actually cause the industry to dramatically increase. So let's turn our attention to the British textile industry again. When they saw that huge increase in productivity, what happened? Did the industry shrink? No, it grew because it turns out that the demand curve for clothing and apparel is elastic. Back then, because it was so expensive, people had like one suit of clothes for the entire week. Not very pleasant, especially if it's been hot weather and you've been sweating. So people wanted more clothes and they bought so much more that even though the price went down, size of the industry went up. I suspect that some of you probably own clothes that you bought and have never worn and are thinking about putting on eBay or selling right now. That's how elastic that demand curve is. So I'm going to close with what I call certain mindset shifts to keep in mind, both for building AI companies as well as for how you are actually applying AI in your own lives. And I'm going to run through roughly 10 of these, and I'll do so really quickly. The first is that mediocrity is now free. I always attribute it to the friend of mine who came up with this, Michael Roberts, Chief Marketing Officer at MetLife, the big insurance company. He told his marketing team, listen, with ChatGPT, mediocrity is free. You bring me mediocre ads, mediocre collateral, it better have been free because I could have gotten it from ChatGPT. Now, what this means is that, in fact, what you need to do to create value for yourself now is to be good, or even better, to be great, because standing out is now the thing that actually helps you. Turning the crank is going to be something that gets done by AI. Forget 10x products, build 1000x products. Maybe a bit of an exaggeration, but the fact is, for most of its existence, the startup world has always said if you build a 10x product, then you can get people to shift from the status quo. 2x is usually not enough. You usually need to be a whole order of magnitude better. With AI, it's very tempting to say, wow, I just created a 10x product. I'm stepped. Maybe if you're just leveraging OpenAI or Claude or something like that, you have like 7 competitors that are doing the same thing. In fact, you have a 10x product and your smarter competitor has a 30x product. So just having a 10x product is not enough. You got to benchmark yourself against the competition and deliver a truly breakthrough amount of value. AI is great at execution. It's like a junior employee. You have to supply the intention. And so obviously having the intention, the ability to guide AI is more valuable than just the execution itself. It's very different than the world used to work. All of us are effectively managers and leaders. However, intention is not where it stops. The level above intention is aspiration, being able to think different, as Steve Jobs once told us to do in one of his Apple ads. Can you think different? Can you come up with those big ideas and then translate those into the intention that AI can then execute? That's what I ask you guys to do, to think bigger. Hiring great people is more important than ever. Early on, we were told, so the person who said mediocrity is free is my friend Michael Roberts, the Chief Marketing Officer of MetLife. I always give him credit because I'm like, Michael, that's such a good line. I have to give you credit every time I use it. Hiring great people is more important than ever. So we were told AI is a great leveler. It'll help out all the people who aren't experts, who are novices, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Turns out that's a huge lie, right? AI does provide tremendous value to people who are not experts, who are novices, but it provides even greater value to those who are. Right? All of us have discovered that the more we know, the more we can leverage AI to actually create something of value. And so we are actually seeing a greater stratification of value rather than having everything be compressed, which means that for you building a company, hiring great people is more important than ever. Not only are they more productive, AI can amplify them more than just pretty good people. And so hiring great people is the order of the day. It may be fewer great people than before, but you got to have even higher quality than before. AI doesn't have a tech problem, it has an adoption problem. Look, everyone underuses AI. I had one founder come to me the other day and he's like, oh, I am trying to figure out how to enter the US market with my company. Can you help me think of some advisors that would be good for that? I said, yeah, I can. You're doing a text to CAD company. So Carl Bass, who I know is the former CEO of Autodesk, he'd be great. My advisor, David Kelly, who founded IDEO, probably knows everyone in the industry. That would be good as well. But why are you asking me that question? In fact, Just 10 minutes before, you were showing me the fancy AI browser that you use instead of Chrome or Safari that allows you to use AI at the drop of a hat. Why didn't you use it on this very specific question?" And he's like, "Oh, I don't know." This is a 22-year-old technical founder of an AI company, right? We don't use AI enough. And the thing is, you as a founder, if you build a great product, you can't assume people are just going to use it. You got to build in the way to drive that adoption. Some of that is telling the story, some of that is clear examples. Some of that, by the way, is just holding people's hands through the process. Like one of the things that really helps people adopt AI is somebody else actually being there with them. So don't be afraid, especially in the early days when you don't need to scale, to go up there and deal with people in person. Applying the Armageddon principle. So this is kind of US centric. If those of you who remember the 1998 movie Armageddon, there's an asteroid coming to hit the Earth. They have to fly up to the asteroid, drill a hole in it, plant a nuclear bomb, blow it in half, save the Earth. Thank you, Brian. I'm glad you liked the movie. Now, Ben Affleck was one of the stars in the movie, along with Bruce Willis. And what happens in the movie is, by the way, Bruce Willis's character is named Harry Stamper. No one remembers it, so I'm just going to call him Harry. I'm just calling him Bruce Willis. NASA goes to Bruce Willis and says, "Hey, you got to train our astronauts how to be oil drillers for this mission." And Bruce Willis says, "Nah, that'll never work. Oil drilling is too complicated. You guys have to train my oil drillers to become astronauts." And that's the whole point of the movie. They train these oil drillers, send them up into space. Ben Affleck, on the commentary track of the DVD or Blu-ray, is like, "So I went to Michael Bay, the director, and I said, let me get this straight. We have these oil drillers who are illiterate criminals, and then we have these astronauts who are Rhodes Scholars with 3 advanced degrees who've been training for decades. How is it that it's easier for oil drillers to become astronauts than astronauts to become oil drillers?" And Michael Bay's response to Ben Affleck was, "Shut the F up, Affleck." Now, the irony is that Michael Bay is actually right when it comes to AI. So the astronauts are the AI scientists, the data scientists, the machine learning specialists, the developers. They understand a lot about being astronauts. And the oil drillers are everyone else, the people who have the business context. And the funny thing is, it's actually harder to transfer the business context than it is to train people with business context on enough AI to be able to have some good ideas on where to apply it. And every time you see two 22-year-olds say, "I'm going to disrupt an industry and raise some money," and then 24 months later shut down having lost people that money, that's because business context is hard. Understanding the exact dynamics of an industry is hard, and a lot harder than it looks when you're a 22-year-old computer scientist. Everyone will build their own software. We have these vibe coding tools now that will let us build our own things. This is no different. Developers have always built their own software. They build something to figure out whether the coffee is warm, to shut off the refrigerator, whatever the case may be. It's just we couldn't do that because we didn't have the skills and we weren't willing to pay a developer to do that. Now that everyone can just sort of screw around on their own, everyone's going to build their own software. But good software is still going to require expertise because the stuff that you vibe code up is fine for a prototype or a throwaway, but it's not good for production code. It's not good for something that's going to be used by thousands or millions of people. And even though Jensen Huang is infinitely richer than I am, here's where he's wrong. He keeps running around saying, we aren't going to have developers anymore. All right, maybe they're not going to be developers in the traditional sense of writing all the code themselves, but I can assure you, I will bet money that 10 years from now, there will be more people who are software engineers than there are software engineers today. The demand is going to increase because software is one of those things for whom the demand curve is remarkably elastic. The lower the cost, the more we're going to want. Future is about prototyping, not planning. You're on this call because you're a successful person. You're probably successful because you're good at planning and making decisions. That's great. Still going to be important. But in a world where AI can try things out inexpensively, quickly, nearly instantaneously, it's much better to adopt a design thinking mindset where you can iterate your way to success by running experiments. When the cost of running an experiment is typing for 10 seconds, why not run that experiment? Don't spend a bunch of time debating, reasoning from first principles. This is the right path. Like, okay, reason from first principles to determine a couple of options. Try all those different options. Pick the one that's actually good. Finally, for those who have children, grandchildren, whatever, people often ask me, what do I tell them? What do I tell them about this world they're coming into where AI is going to dominate? How am I going to make sure that they're still learning? And my answer to that is don't seek answers, seek understanding. We have a broken education system in the world of AI because our education system evaluates people by seeing how well they answer questions. AI is going to do that for them. We don't actually want to know how well they answer questions. We want to know, do they actually understand? And so when you are talking to your children or your grandchildren, or even yourself, if you want to stay current, as you're using AI, don't just use it to get the answers. Also use it to develop your understanding. You ask a question, you get an answer, ask, why is this the answer? What are the factors you considered? What are the things that look, what are the things that might have been an answer, but you rejected and why? Develop that greater understanding so that you can become much better at leveraging these tools in the future. So, final thing, I'm going to give you copies of the slides. So, you can use this QR code, you can scan it, fill out a form. You do have to give me your email address because someday I'll have some evil plan where I'll use them, but I don't use them right now. But you will be able to download the slides plus a bunch of other stuff. Probably the most interesting other bonus things I use this for because I do different talks. You'll see copies of my different talks. So you're like, oh, I wonder what he talks about to other people. Guess what? You can see that. Also, there are two book length PDFs. They're short, about 16,000 words each. One is a book on how to become a venture capitalist. And I wrote that book in 12 hours by leveraging the power of AI. And then the second book is a book I wrote without AI called How to Write a Book with AI in a Weekend, detailing the process of writing a book with AI in 12 hours.
Perfect. Just pull the link up too. And then, yeah, amazing talk. We're definitely excited to check out those other materials and look at kind of what the takeaways are from this. And so we'd love to, we'll have essentially time for questions here, but I wanted to kind of leave one question to kind of lead it off
Yes.
following, with blitzscaling. So a lot of founders, whether you're in series A and beyond, whether you're in your first 5 customers, 10 customers, what would you say the most actionable takeaway, following these things to, hey, I want to apply these principles. What's the first step I should take?
The first step you should take is you say, am I in a Ricky Bobby market? First and foremost, you can't sort of say, oh, I'm a startup. Now let me make it into a blitzscaling startup, right? Because that depends on the market you're in. Ideally, find that market that's big, that's going to be vastly profitable, but has those market dynamics that will allow you to be the big winner. And it's something that oftentimes people don't consider when they go to start a company. They just like, this is a pain. I'm going to solve it. That's great. But you really should think about the market first. And by the way, in addition to that top down analysis of the market, the other thing I often tell people, this is not from blitzscaling, but it is one of the pieces of advice that I think is really smart. Pick a market, which is to say, pick a set of customers that you enjoy interacting with and helping. Because if you pick a market just because it's a big market and you read something about it, and then you discover that you don't actually like the people in that market, and then you're stuck for the next 5 years trying to make a business work, that's going to be miserable, right? At least make sure that as you're picking markets, also consider, are these the kind of customers I want to be spending my life with?
That's great. Thank you. And then maybe one more follow up here, and then we'll open it up. Is for those that everyone's got a different reason for becoming a founder, whether they want to grow it to that 100,000x type unicorn, or maybe it's more of a lifestyle business, or maybe more, or whatever it is. Are there principles from the blitzscaling playbook, or that maybe someone that could apply, right? Maybe they're not in the Ricky Bobby market,
Yeah,
but they love supporting these customers.
absolutely.
That's right. Like what are those kind of, how do you evaluate that?
Yeah. So you can basically think of all those counterintuitive principles as the tools of blitzscaling. And you can say, I can apply these in instances, even if it's not a blitzscaling instance, where I believe that speed is essential. Because all of those blitzscaling techniques are just ways to move faster. And if you have a reason for moving faster, obviously with blitzscaling, the reason for moving faster is to win a winner take most market, but you may have other reasons for speed. And those blitzscaling techniques can help you achieve that speed.
Perfect. Thank you. All right. So we'll open it up. Any questions, anything at all, you can, unmute yourself, ask it, type it in the chat. We will leave it open to there. So any questions?
And I'll pull down the slides because now I can see your faces better.
Perfect. And yeah, because we still have plenty of questions too that people have submitted that weren't able to join, but I'm going to hold off on those at least to give people a chance to ask some questions here. And
Well,
then,
we want to reward people for showing up. That makes a lot of sense to me.
absolutely. All right. Well, then, yeah, people got, whether it's on the presentation itself, even Chris's story, right? Like, I think that's a big piece. Gary, please.
Hey, Chris. Thank you for that. Really insightful. Love the presentation and have already started reading some of the documents you shared. So thank you for that. I've got a question around, obviously, AI is at the center of everything we do. And you referenced software engineers or developers. I want to particularly hone in on product. If you were starting a new venture today, obviously you you invest regularly in new ventures. How would you advise others who are starting out to build a product team or an engineering team of humans, right? Because it's so important in part of, is in the product building process to build the human aspect as well. So what would be your take on that?
Absolutely. So the first thing I do is I would start by asking, what is the smallest team possible that could still do this? And that means, identifying some pretty amazing individuals. Remember the whole principle of hiring great people. And then figuring out, okay, well, how many people do you actually need? Because as it turns out, and anyone who's ever worked with a team knows, the bigger the team, the harder it is to coordinate. And the smaller the team, the more productive on a per person basis it can be, especially with AI. So that's the first thing I'd start with. I would then sort of grow it slowly based on what people actually needed. But the other thing that I would do is I would also, as soon as I could, based on there being enough resources, I would put someone in charge of AI adoption at the company itself because everyone's got work to do. And it's hard for people to devote the time to figuring out what are different approaches or tools or other things they could use. Yeah, people kind of do it naturally, but they're doing it in their spare time. And when there's a deadline, they're not going to do it. It's better to have somebody who's really focused on thinking deeply about how can we actually be AI first? How can we actually get as much productivity out of this as possible? How do we make sure we're using the right kinds of tools and really driving this forward? And having that person inside the company who deeply understands your business context is one of the ways of solving the astronaut oil driller conundrum.
Awesome. Yeah, great shout. Thank you very much.
All right. Looks like Catherine's got a couple questions as well. So first one is like, for those of maybe that are in service-based models, how do you transform from a service to product to be able to scale better, but without losing the vision or while still maintaining the vision?
Yeah. So the good news is I think this is going to become easier than ever. One of the things that I've said to a number of different folks is that I think that AI could potentially make services businesses more scalable than ever before. Historically, we always warn people against building services businesses, at least in the venture industry, because they're like, oh, it doesn't scale. That's a principle that's not a universal principle like the law of gravitation. It's based on the tools that we have at hand. And with AI, the tools have changed some. And it may be that we can enhance individual human productivity to the point where it actually makes sense. Right? If you think about a services industry, the reason they're saying that essentially, if you sort of start to unpack it, is we generate revenue by selling this person's time. We can only sell that time for a certain amount of money. And therefore, it's not scalable because to generate an additional $200,000 in revenue, we have to hire another person. And therefore, to get to $1 billion in revenue is going to take too many people and too much time. And versus, oh, with software, we can get there because for these software engineers, it's essentially unlimited. We can scale up and it'll be the same number of software engineers. We'll slightly scale up sales and so on and so forth. If AI is able to dramatically amplify the productivity and you have really, really strong performers on your team, maybe instead of being able to generate 200,000 in revenue ahead, you're able to generate 1 million ahead or 3 million ahead. Once you do that, the normal scalability concerns about building a services business are not as great as they once were. Now, mind you, you have to be careful, make sure it's not a temporary thing where you happen to be able to charge $3 million now because your competitors are morons and haven't adopted AI, and then eventually they'll adopt it and things will go away. The answer to that is instead make hay while the sun shines and bank your profits. But the point is that I think that services are more scalable than ever before. The second thing is going from services to product. So this really is a question of sitting down, looking at the actual services projects you've done and saying, okay, is there enough commonality to actually build a product? Because that's the thing that products have in common that services don't. It's not just about human delivery, it's about consistency. It's about the ability to serve multiple people with essentially the same thing, as opposed to everything being bespoke. And so the thing you're looking for is that commonality, or at least commonality to the point where AI can serve and do it.
Great. And it looks like Joyce has your hand raised. Feel free to, Joyce, you're not, but I think you're muted right now as well. Think you can unmute.
Can you unmute her?
Uh,
If not, you can type, I guess.
yeah, sorry. It doesn't let me unmute you manually, but Joyce, if you want to type the question out, that'd be great.
Or if somebody is good at lip reading, they could be the translator too. I unfortunately am not a lip reader.
Nor am I. We will. All right.
There we go. All right. What's your favorite mistake you see founders making? What mistakes do you see provide the biggest learning curves? Oh, what mistakes do you see provide the big? Huh. That is interesting. I've never had that question before. So when it comes to mistakes, obviously, I think the mistakes that are going to that are going to cause you to learn the most are mistakes that are acts of commission rather than omission. I think that the greatest learning curve comes from engaging directly with the customers. So I think that the greatest mistakes from a learning curve comes from getting really close to your customers. So it might be that you are launching in with new customers. It might be that you put together, you bite off more than you can chew and putting together a conference for your customers or a meet or gathering for your customers or something like that. But at the end of the day, I think the greatest learning curve comes from interacting with the people who are actually using your product or service.
Great point. All right. And I think we had one more. I guess that was probably from Catherine. Sorry about the follow up, better scaling with service. So I think we answered that one. I'll take another. The last question we had for the submission was more on the venture landscape. And so from
Hmm.
what you're seeing at Blitzscaling Ventures, we've seen a lot where uh, capital is being deployed, right? And regardless of the time frame of the year, like what's your kind of quick 30,000-foot view of where the VC and fundraising landscape is right now?
Excellent question. So there have obviously been a lot of changes in the VC landscape overall, and it is a classic sort of, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. So on the one hand, we have mega funds, or perhaps I should call them giga funds, raising more money than ever any time in history. I like to tell people this is my 30th year in the startup world. In 1995, the total size of the venture capital industry was $5 billion. Now we have multiple funds that are over 10 times that size. And that deployment of those funds, plus from sovereign wealth funds and other players that have entered the market, is why the VC funding is greater than ever. But a disproportionate amount of that funding is going to a limited number of companies like OpenAI, Anthropic, et cetera. So we have this massive amount of money going into all these companies. And at the same time, I hear from founders all the time who are not in AI saying, I'm having trouble raising money. And by the way, smaller VCs still face a struggle as well. Like there are because there haven't been as many exits for a couple of years, there are fewer LPs who are making new commitments to smaller VCs. So that's kind of the backdrop and the landscape as it happens right now. Now, the big question is, what does this actually mean? Well, the funny thing is, good times usually mean bad times are ahead. Bad times usually mean good times are ahead. That's just the nature of the beast. Because the industry was small back in 1995, there were great returns ahead. Once it got to be $100 million in 1999, all of a sudden, $100 billion in 1999, all of a sudden things started going south. So when you have these extreme swings, there often is mean reversion. So if mean reversion applies, then what we should expect is a decline in the returns from mega funds with people saying, hey, maybe this wasn't a good idea, and good returns from smaller funds, which will eventually result in them raising more money and becoming bigger funds and having trouble maintaining those returns. But we'll deal with that problem when the time comes.
Perfect. Thank you for that. All right. Now we've just got a few minutes left here. Any other final questions from anyone in the audience? All right. Looks great. Chris, just wanted to thank you so much for your time. What's the best way?
Wait, Catherine wants to ask one more question.
Sorry,
All
I'm typing it. I can't type it as fast.
No problem.
The biggest thing is I'm in the environmental industry, and so there's
Mhm.
no secret that AI is extremely, um, harmful
Power
to,
hungry.
yeah, the water it uses and the pollution it emits. There's that end of it. I'm also have a background in cognitive science and behavioral science. So there's also the element of like people don't trust AI very much,
Correct.
at least in a lot of industries. For instance, if you're in the service industry, people will find you less trustworthy if they know that you're using AI
Mhm.
for your services. And then on the other end, with the learning aspect, there has been psychological research in terms of people, if they're using AI to understand something or produce an answer, like you said before, there's very, very, very or little to no retention as
That's
compared
right.
to thinking it through and researching it yourself. So, like, how do we actually use it as a tool functionally without
Yes.
repeating the same mistake of the industrial um, revolution, which ultimately has led to the huge problems that we're dealing with now?
Yes. So there's the aspirational answer, and then there's what's likely to happen. On the aspirational side, I mean, these problems are all addressable. So, for example, the power consumption of AI. That's because of the massive training costs and because of running the biggest possible models, churning through tokens like there's no tomorrow. And that's because right now, what the market's saying is give me the best possible results, and I don't care about the cost. And in fact, if you're using AI and you're willing to use, say, GPT 3.5, the cost to do that in terms of both energy and money is literally maybe 4 orders of magnitude less than asking current ChatGPT a question. And so that's both terrifying. It's one of the reasons why there's more and more power consumption and things like that. But it also says that we have the ability to actually reduce the amount of power that AI consumes. It is simply that we choose not to, which is frustrating but true. Same holds true on the thinking, the education side. As I mentioned, people could use AI to help drive understanding. They choose not to because they take the shortcut. They're like, AI gave me the answer, let me hand them the answer, that's it. So those are all big issues. Now, how do we solve those issues? One thing is by doing what you're doing, which is bringing them up, making sure that people are aware of these issues. So at least the people that are aware of the issues can think about them, can address them, can take them into account. But the other thing that gives me optimism is that, attitudes change and people realize things. It's not, again, I think that with the Industrial Revolution, there are things that we are able to ultimately fix and things that we are still trying to figure out how to fix. The Industrial Revolution prompted the creation of the societal safety net because all of a sudden people were not subsistence farmers. They were not out in the country able to provide for themselves. Now all of a sudden, if they lost their job, they couldn't eat. And so society is like, oh crap, if we're a democracy and people's votes count, and also, by the way, most people don't like to see suffering around them, maybe we'll actually provide a safety net. Obviously, these days, some countries provide more of a safety net than others, but all of them do more than they did before the Industrial Revolution happened. Same holds true for things like physical education and getting people to exercise, because if you're not in the fields anymore and you're instead sitting at a desk, all of a sudden you are not going to be in the same physical condition as before. So we see these changes, but there are broader ones that are harder to deal with, the economic externality of carbon dioxide and global warming probably being the most prominent example. I do think that people's attitudes towards AI will change and normalize over time. I can tell you that in 1995, people said, oh, I don't think Amazon will ever work because will people ever trust the internet with their credit card information? And that was obviously dumb then, but it was something that many people believed. And so people correctly are skeptical of AI because it is not a magical genie that gives you right answers. It is a technology that gives you answers quickly and cheaply that may be right or not. And so hopefully people will come to understand it more over time and be able to use it more, effectively. The final thing I would say here is that one of the sayings that my co-author likes to say, and it is only somewhat self-serving, is that the answer to the problems of AI is usually more AI. So, for example, one of the big problems with AI right now is its ability to generate these deep fakes and things like that. And it's not just, oh, I'm going to put this celebrity into this fake pornographic video, which is terrible and awful to begin with. But the real worst part is people using AI deepfakes to scam elderly people, right? They're super vulnerable. People are being scammed all the time. I have friends whose parents have been scammed. And so I know at least one founder who's like building AI that is going to be always available to senior citizens and that can be provided to them through ARP and other things like that to help them navigate this. And again, this is nothing new. I remember in the 1990s, people saying, oh, with Photoshop, how can I believe any photograph ever? I'm like, well, we're going to change the way we look at photographs. And we're going to change the way we look at video. We're going to change the way we look at all these things. It's difficult to put the genie back in the bottle. I am still optimistic over the long run, but I am not going to tell you it's going to be a smooth ride.
Thank you for that, Chris. That amazing kind of recap of everything that we're seeing on that end. And so I put your LinkedIn in the chat. Is there a best way that you recommend people get in touch with you?
Yeah, that's a good way. And if you have the ability to do a personalized invite, some people do, some people don't, and mention that you saw me here, because obviously I could see some of the names flash past. It doesn't mean I'll remember all of them. That would be great.
Amazing.
And then if you're looking for me in general, chrisyeh.com is sort of the central clearinghouse for me. Most of my stuff usually goes on LinkedIn, but chrisyeh.com is sort of like a place where you can get all the information about me, or if you're running a conference or something and you want me to come speak, and that's where you can fill out a form.
Amazing. Well, thank you all for your great questions. Chris, of course, thank you for sharing and all the information. We got those slides downloaded. We'll appreciate the time here and looking forward to learning more and keeping in touch.
My pleasure. Thank you, guys.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Cheers. Take care.
Thanks, Chris. Thank you.
Thank you.